Hello everyone, welcome to the third video in the Pete McKee Art History series. If you are new to this channel, then thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share if you enjoyed this video. I'm Ellen, the curator at the McKee Gallery, and today we'll be looking at one of Pete McKee's works of art and we'll discuss its influences. If you are not familiar with who Pete McKee is, then please check out the beginning of our first video, which gives insight into how Pete became an artist and the style he is known for. A link to this video can be found below. Today we will be discussing one of Pete's more recent works, The Fish Supper. Created in 2018 for his exhibition This Class Works, this piece offers a snapshot into working class life. Such everyday scenes are typical of Pete's work, who through his sensitive and affectionate observation gives weight and significance to ordinary scenes. His handling of such subjects is often thought-provoking and humorous, providing commentary on what makes us who we are, paying attention to seemingly unimportant idiosyncrasies that might otherwise be overlooked yet reveal so much. The Fish Supper is no exception from Pete's specific treatment of his characters and the places they inhabit. Within the painting, a family gets ready to share an evening meal. The central father figure sets about buttering the bread as if he has been assigned a serious and important task. He cradles a slice in one hand as he slaps on butter with conviction. His solid and still pose contrasts with the busy activity that surrounds him. The sons to the right squabble, eager to get first dibs, whilst the mother tries to regain some order by placing down plates that Pete states would have previously been heated in the oven in his household. The plates are ignored by the daughter to the left, who has already gone in to sample one of the chips. The nan points to a piece she wants, whilst holding an aged dog who peeks out over the side, hoping to get some scraps. All of these details bring the painting to life and recall the excitement and joy felt when enjoying an end-of-the-week treat with your family. Details such as the ketchup bottle's lid that has not been screwed on properly since the last time it was used, that sits atop congealed sauce, is another simple yet effective observation that imbues this image with familiarity. The non-brewed condiment, salt, mushy peas and pot of brewed tea add further detail and also offer an autobiographical narrative. On describing the work, Pete said, "It had to be non-brewed condiment seen in pretty much every chippy in Sheffield. My brother Stuart still pickles onions in this miraculous brown liquid for Christmas presents each year. Back in the day, we'd sometimes even make a spur-of-the-moment Sheffield salad, where we'd slice up onion and cucumber and let it infuse for an hour or so in the non-brewed, resulting in a heavenly concoction." A pot of tea also made a regular appearance at a chippy tea when Pete was a child, as it cut through the grease of the meal when eating it at home, replacing the tin of pop, preferably dandelion and burdock, that you might otherwise have drank alongside the meal. The bread, wrapped in its distinct green and white striped packaging, is also another reference to Pete's childhood. A fleet of vans delivering bread from Sheffield's Fletchers bakery would often be seen driving around neighbourhoods, this service lasting until the early 1990s. Once parked up, people would come out of their homes to buy bread directly from the back of the van, depicted in Pete's painting, a medium-sliced loaf and an elephant's foot bun. Pete's family would make a daily purchase of a Fletcher's medium-sliced loaf, which appears in The Fish Supper. In the same exhibition this painting was made for, Pete created a sculpture with prop designer Neil Gidley, entitled Staff of Life, that replicates a loaf of Fletcher's bread. With its biblical origins, the term staff of life signifies bread, the most commonplace food eaten worldwide and for many cultures, one of the most important. By creating a sculpture that replicates an otherwise ordinary loaf of bread, encasing it in glass like a religious relic, Pete gives everyday objects, scenes or people an important platform. Pete also uses religious references in The Fish Supper, which again makes this everyday scene seem important and grandiose, another humorous layer in this work. After completing this painting, Pete wrote, "In The Fish Supper, the Renaissance meets the Baroque, as I reference Leonardo da Vinci's title, The Last Supper, and the genius of Caravaggio's The Supper at Emmaus, drawing inspiration from its composition. Like The Supper at Emmaus, the viewer is placed close to the action, as the characters intertwine in the foreground, fighting over an evening meal of fish and chips, or what I like to refer to as a chippy tea. I adore Caravaggio. He's my favourite artist and I travel to find his work in museums and churches around Europe. I love his choice of humble working class models to depict religious motifs." We will now examine Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio's striking and wonderfully atmospheric The Supper at Emmaus. But before this, a little about Caravaggio. Born in 1571 in northern Italy, Caravaggio was an extremely controversial character during his day, not only for his work but also for his tumultuous personal life. His models were often people selected from the streets, giving his paintings a gritty, more realistic feel than the work of his contemporaries and the art that had come before him. This sometimes caused outrage when he painted models with all their flaws to represent holy figures. It has been said that the Virgin Mary and the death of the Virgin was possibly modelled by a prostitute. Regardless of who the model was, the composition and the way the Virgin Mary has been depicted was at odds with traditional religious imagery. On the Louvre website, the museum this work is housed in, on describing the painting it states, "Virtually no element here testifies to the divine nature of the subject. Caravaggio completely abandons the iconography traditionally used to indicate the holiness of the Virgin. In this cast-off body, nothing of the respectful representation found in devotional paintings remains." Needless to say, the church this work was intended for rejected it. Caravaggio also had several brushes with the law, was arrested multiple times, committed murder, and risked his life escaping from prison. He was nevertheless a genius, working exceptionally fast, often painting directly onto canvas without the need of a preliminary sketch. Despite his talents, he was nearly forgotten about after his death, largely due to the fact that the artist never kept journals or wrote about his life. He was rediscovered in the 1920s and is now one of the most famous painters in the history of art. Returning to the supper at Emmaus, we can see that, gathered around a table laden with food, are three men who face a youthful figure. This scene captures the very moment when the two disciples sat at the table realise they are not looking at a young stranger, who they met earlier that day on a road from Jerusalem to Emmaus, but are in fact sat with the resurrected Christ who had been crucified days before. The man to the left of the composition has his back to us, his hands clasped around the arms of his chair as if he is about to stand up with shock. The man on the right throws out his arms, one palm open towards the viewer, which through Caravaggio's deft use of foreshortening makes it look as though his hand is about to come out of the painting. The bowl of fruit hangs precariously over the edge of the table, possibly on the verge of falling. These realistic details draw the viewer into the painting, which feels three-dimensional and active. From the left of the scene, a heavenly light shines diagonally across the painting, causing shadows to be cast from the objects on the table. At the same time, Christ's face is illuminated, emphasizing this key moment when he reveals who he really is to his disciples before vanishing. The strong contrast between light and dark, known as chiaroscuro, a technique Caravaggio is widely associated with, adds drama to the composition. Although the main purpose of this work is to tell a religious story, Caravaggio also takes an opportunity to demonstrate his range of artistic skill. The objects on the table become a still life painting within this religious tableau, as the artist uses various techniques to make the food and the utensils as realistic as possible. Light shines clearly through the carafe of water, leaving a reflection around its base. Imperceptible brushstrokes detail the scales on the chicken feet and the bumps on its cooked skin. The grapes in the bowl of fruit reflect the light from the left that highlights their plump ripeness, so realistic in their rendering that it seems as if it would almost be possible to pluck one out from the painting. The apples in the wicker bowl are marked with tiny dark flecks that indicate decay, typical of still lifes at the time, a genre of art popularised by Flemish painters as early as the 16th century, which gained further popularity in the 17th. Still lifes from this period were extremely decorative and allowed the viewer to look at scholarly and worldly objects, as well as flowers and fruit without an expiration date. Some of these works were known as vanitas, meaning vanity, which reminded the viewer that life is fleeting and that earthly pleasures do not last forever, and are ultimately vain pursuits. This is why amongst various finery such as books, instruments and exquisite glassware, skulls can sometimes be spotted in these compositions, flowers might be painted on the verge of wilting, and fruit would sometimes be depicted on the turn, as fecundity is always followed by death. Caravaggio's choice to depict the apples this way could also point towards the themes of life and death, which is told by the story of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. Although Pete was not brought up in a religious household, in the fish supper he uses religious references to bring weight to the ordinary. As fish and chips are often eaten on a Friday because of its end-of-the-week treat status, when painting this work, Pete was also aware of the fact that eating fish on a Friday is a traditional Christian practice. This stems from observing the Bible, which states that Christ died for our sins on what is known as Good Friday. As Christ sacrificed his flesh for humanity, many Christians do not eat animal meat or warm-blooded meat on this day of the week, as there is a connection between Christ's sacrifice and execution. However, as fish is cold-blooded, it does not have this connection. Bread on the table also has a religious significance, as it was eaten at the Last Supper before Jesus was crucified. Fish and bread's holy status also exists because of the biblical story, the feeding of the 5,000, in which Jesus is able to use 5 loaves and 2 fishes to feed a multitude of people. Returning to Pete's painting, we can see the compositional inspiration he has taken from the supper at Emmaus, as the father figure remains composed and calm while surrounded by movement, like Caravaggio's Christ. As mentioned, Caravaggio controversially used ordinary people for models to depict religious and mythological figures. He also used them as subjects for contemporary scenes, something Pete also does, as the majority of his paintings depict working-class subjects, reflecting Pete's background. This is where we will conclude our video. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to check out our next one, which will examine the connection between Pete's work and another famous work of art. Many thanks for watching.